Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and for the last time this year, we're breaking down the final episode of the first pod of Season 2 has just dropped, and throughout this video we're going to be breaking down the Easter eggs, connections to the comics, and everything that you need to know. I also spoke to Co-Showrunner Simon Racioppa about what happened in this entry and some of the themes, so make sure you stick around for that. Please hit the thumbs up button one last time, and without out of the way, huge thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into Invincible. Okay, so predominantly, this episode takes place around issue 26 to 30. Though there are other elements that are part of it, those are the main points that we're going to be covering if you're interested in the comics. Now the midpoint of issue 26 is Nolan recapping where his journey took him to at the end of Season 1. That's actually where we begin here, and at the sounds of Avalanche by Nick Cave, we watch him journeying across the stars. The song was originally written by Leonard Cohen, with him basing it off a poem that he wrote when he was younger. In the comics, we get the conflict really spelled out for us, with Omni-Man discussing how he felt upon refusing to kill Mark. He even said that inside he knew Mark was weak and had to die, and that was the Viltumite way. However, Nolan then stated that he had two choices, one in which he killed Mark and enslaved the Earth, and one in which he didn't. In the end, he realized he couldn't do it, and we saw as he fled into the stars. Now, as we know, there are other Earths where Mark joined up with his father, and they took over the planet. Eventually, though, as we saw with Levi, things didn't always lead to victory. Still, though, there are those realities where he came out on top, but both couldn't do something that required the death of their loved one. As he sits out on the planets, we also get an image that riffs on the panel in the comics, with him perched on a rock looking out at the stars. Off his inner monologue in the book, we know what his plan was, and he was actually seeking out other planets as a way to make good on his failure. Nolan wanted to find another planet and hoped that if he enslaved it, then the Viltumites would welcome him back with open arms. As we know, they're out looking for him in the galaxy, as abandoning your post is punishable by death. Now, within a week of leaving Earth, we learned he discovered Thraxa, but the journey in the show is far more fleshed out. We see him traveling the cosmos, and at one point even standing on the edge of a black hole. This is modeled in the same way that a rendering of one was created for Christopher Nolan's Interstellar. Using calculations, they created a simulation for one, which is sought to be exactly how one would look in real life. Unlike the comic, Nolan actually finds his new home by saving a doomed vessel, rather than going out specifically as a conqueror. It shows how much he's changed as a person, and this was the man who originally was willing to let others die because he viewed them as less than him. Talking about this guy.
Thank you. Didn't think I was gonna make it.
Watch your back. Now he ends up going to leave, but he's welcomed as a hero. Now technically, the people here are what he should view as being lower than human, as they're insect-like and have very short lifespans. They only live for roughly 9 months, which would seem even more insignificant to this man who lives for millennia. They welcome him with open arms and view him as a hero that helps out who he can. In the comics, he saw that because of their short lifespan, they cycle through leaders at an alarming rate. Thus, it wasn't long until he was the oldest person on the planet, and thus he could take control and just run things from the throne. Here though, they've altered things up a lot, but also changed Mark's reaction to how he is with him. In both, the pair clench their fists up, and it seems like they're gonna duke it out. Mark makes a move to see if he's gonna flinch, whereas in the comics he just goes straight in for the hug. In the show, Mark's way more argumentative, and probably how someone would act in real life. He berates him for killing thousands and manipulating him to get there, whereas in the source material, he just begs for him to come back. Both, I think, are valid comments on divorce and how kids act when confronted by their parents in the aftermath. This is something I spoke about with Simon back for episode 1, but it spoiled things in this, so I thought I'd leave it out of the video, but it will be posted in our full interview on our Clips channel. Now Mark finishes the conversation by telling him to F off, whereas in the comics they then toured the planet. It's way more dismissive, with him begging him to come back, but Nolan coldly says that he's made a new home here. Mark takes to the sky, determined to just fly home, but his dad calmly talks him down into returning to the planet. Nolan appeals to his better emotions, and he knows that he'll stay because the people need his help. This better side is clearly rubbed off on him too when he wants to protect the planet as he's built a life there. We then get a scene where he introduces his wife, and the pair... Oh god, I'm gonna be sick. Now, but this kissing was in the comics too, and it's probably one of the most memorable moments in the entire run. It's easily a metaphor for when you find out one of your parents has moved on and is with someone else, and to make things more difficult, the pair have had a kid. At this point, Mark meets his half-brother, who looks his way because of his Viltrumite DNA. That's so strong it actually overpowers his Thraxa inside and makes him look more like what a Viltrumite does. Now, I did weigh up whether to spoil this next bit or not, and that is to just call him by his name in the comics. It's kinda sentimental how he gets it though, so I think it's best not to do it for now, so I'm just gonna refer to him as being Mark's brother. At this point we cut to the title sequence, which is covering a swear word instead of Invincible.
You gotta be...
Still though, works well, but it shows how things have turned on their heads to the point that even the title sequence is now out of whack. And next we jump to Debbie and we can catch her walking barefoot, still broken from that SOS meeting. The song talks about as someone who's had their relationship fall apart, but in the end would still kill for the person that left them. They talk about being set up alone on Olympus and longing for that person to come back to their life. Debbie is very much a broken woman, and while Nolan's off doing his thing, she's stuck in this isolated state. I love the way that things are put together here, and we just see her wandering the streets alone. This of course reflects how Nolan flew through space, and in the end it's a beautiful marrying of the images. In what's one of the darkest moments in the season, we see she looks out over a bridge and clearly contemplates whether it's worth living anymore. Now this, along with the majority of the stuff from the show involving her, is all brand new. Though she has a bit later on that pulls from the comics, it is still mainly new stuff. I really love how they've taken the time to flesh her out here though, as she's really one of the most tragic characters in the entire show that didn't get our full focus in the source material. And that moment comes out when we see her sat in her home drinking alone in what's almost a completely wordless page. Looking through photo albums and drinking on her own, this is a moment later built upon by the visit with Art. Either way, we have her visiting Nolan's grave and see how opposite the description is to what's revealed in the end. It's kind of true, that what it says I suppose, but not with Debbie and Mark.
I do love your mother, but she's more like a pet to me.
Whew, rough. No, she basically made up who he was, but to be fair, he fooled the entire world. That's what makes the backlash and turmoil Debbie feels so devastating, because Nolan managed to trick everyone on Earth. However, she's the one who's still living with the betrayal, while everyone else is now getting back to normal. Now speaking of getting back to normal, we see the Maulers back in their factory, creating a clone and duplicating their brains. The story here pulls from issues 28 and 29, with the duplication and conclusion playing out across 3 pages. We see what happens when one Mauler knows they're original, and how this creates a power imbalance that leads to jealousy.
We had to make it seamless. Otherwise, one of us knows he's the clone, and that never ends well.
Due to one being badly busted up, we now know for definite which one the original is, and there's such a funny panel in the comic where he's just bossing him around, and in both the originals says that it's going to be so much better. Now back at Debbie's, we cut to Donald knocking on her door, and he goes on an introspective look due to his existential crisis. Looking at the pile of rubble, he starts to piece things together, and in the end discovers that he's a robot. He does this by slicing himself open, which reminded me a lot of the scene in Terminator 2. Now as always, stuff's been vastly moved about for the show, with these elements happening a hell of a lot differently. Firstly, the Maulers actually cloned themselves, and then the original died before the next one was created, and they then headed out. It was at this point that they were then caught by a robot who brought them in to move across his mind. So all that was happening way later on, as was the stuff with the Reaniman and Rick. Donald went in to comfort him because he'd been turned into a cyborg, and Rick was wondering if he'd ever get a normal life. Now at this point, Donald opened up to reveal he was one too, and talked about the wife and family that he'd gone on to have. Nobody had known that he was actually part machine, and it helped for him to basically act as a very supportive character. He did learn way before the comic began, so him discovering it here is just giving Donald more to do. Anyway, across at the university, we see Eve meeting Amber and William, but she's clearly struggling with what happened last week. Now, the important thing to pay attention to here is Amber struggling with Mark being away. I think once we pick up the second part of the season, you're gonna see the toll this trip takes, as Mark's not exactly getting home anytime soon. So you have all that to deal with, while Mark has his own issues as well. Back on Thraxa, we see Mark's angered about being replaced and how Nolan's priorities and mind state have changed. Like the source material, we discover that Viltumites are forbidden from breeding with inferior races, and how they were cool with humans, but grasshopper girls are too much. It's too much, mate. They'll be viewed as being inferior, and thus wiped out along with Nolan's son. Nolan genuinely seems to repent what he did, and he's found humanity getting snug with the bugs. Now he wants to start training, but in both versions, their time's cut short. In the comics, we had a guy bursting in, whereas here the Viltrumites rain down like gods. They do that in the comics too, but it's a lot more sudden, with the members also being slightly different as well. At this point, Mark races across the skyline, and we see Mark dashing away with Andressa and his brother in his arms. It's just like the comics, and Nolan took one look at Andressa and couldn't wait to undress her.
Ha ha!
Now elsewhere, we join Eve at the Guardians of the Globe headquarters. We take a bit of a focus on the shower, and this is of course where she discovered Rexplode was cheating on her with Duplicate. Interestingly, this interior is also very similar to how it's presented in the comics when Rexplode discovered that Duplicate was cheating on him. She can't go back home and doesn't want to go to the treehouse, so she ends up lying low here. At this point, she overhears Kill Cannon breaking in, who you might recognize from the first episode of Season 1. This was the first person Mark fought after getting his costume, and it's also the first time he used his superhero name. Kill Cannon was a transformative villain for Mark, and now here he works as this again for Eve. Now back on Thraxa, we see Mark arriving at the secret tunnel. These are the caves of Roclane, which Andressa is unsure of the origins of. This is likely because of how short the lifespan of them is, and chances are they probably only got found 3 years ago. In the comics though, we discover a bit more, and learn that Thraxa used to endure massive lightning storms. They say this happens once every generation, and thus Roclane sought them out so that people could find shelter. With them just living 9 months, it's probably just part of the seasons, but they see it as being this legendary thing from the past. Also, Andressa says her lifespan's about a year, but yeah, comics just drilled into my brain. Anyway, at this point, she explains how the civilization works and how they have to pick things up quickly in order to advance as a people. In the comics, it's explained they master any task almost instantly upon doing it, which is a necessity of their lack of time. The pair also have a conversation here that's akin to the source material, with her very much talking about how she and Nolan fell in love. Makes you relate to her a lot, and finally Mark sees that it's not her fault. Unfortunately though, it's broken up by a big character from the comics, Mark's second Viltrumite test in the form of Lucan. Though the other 2 members aren't in the source material, here they brought him across to have these moments playing out. Now Lucan was first introduced here in the comics, though I think we may have seen a younger version of him in the show before. There was a guy that looked like him with a bit of hair in the Viltrumite flashback, but I don't think we'll ever get to confirm whether that's the case or not. Either way, in the comics, Lucan's arrival is what ends issue 27 with us getting a big cliffhanger about what would happen next. He actually tells Mark that if he's able to withstand his assault, he'll let him live, and if not, then he'll die. The Viltrumites, of course, have a Spartan-type mindstay, wherein that only the strongest survive. Thus, Mark going toe-to-toe is the only way to prove his worth, with Lucan being one of the planet's most powerful members. It's during this in the comics and show that he then discovers Andressa and his brother, which then leads into a big fight. Now they do change things up, as in the source material, Mark flees, and it's only when flying through the air that Omni-Man intervenes. Here though, Nolan arrives in the caves, and this was done to give us this added line.
Stay away from my children, Lucan. You knew the consequences when you had them.
Just goes to show how Nolan knew what kind of world he was bringing them into, and how his children would always be in danger. It also allows Mark to save Andressa and his brother, with us getting way more focus on the Nolan vs Lucan fight. In the book, we never actually see the disemboweling, whereas here they go all out with it. It also changes things by having Andressa go further into the caves, whereas they were out and about already, so they then flew back and dropped her off. Just neater, really, innit? Just more economical having the fight remain in the caves, rather than them leaving and then going back to drop her off and then leave again. Anyway, we see Kill Cannon and Eve going toe-to-toe on the bridge, and it's kind of the staple of lots of superhero showdowns. They did it first in the Spider-Man films, then the Amazing Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, it was in that as well. Basically loads of them, because it involves heroes having to fight a threat, but also protect the innocent bystanders there. This is what gets Eve caught out, and she has to dive in to try and save 2 people. Again, it's playing into her fear that any good action comes with a cost, and she can't do right for doing wrong. Is that a saying? Also, nice detail, having her scuba gear, but in the end, she's just clearly shook. Now back with Debbie, we see she goes through her old photos, at which point she's then joined by Art. This is kind of playing off the back of a pod in issue 22 when the pair go to a bar and then drown their sorrows. You have to remember he was pretty much Nolan's best friend, and in the comics they have a lot of time sharing drinks and just joking around. Art is someone who also got fooled as well, and he too struggled with the lies that he told him. Debbie starts to realize that Nolan was hardly there, and that due to his life she almost raised Mark single-handedly. She's the reason why Mark defied his father, and she's the reason that the world wasn't enslaved. It was her teachings that caused him to be the way he is, which is a really good message to take from this all. Now elsewhere we watch Donald investigating the truth and see the surveillance on Omni-Man's house. In episode 7 we watched as he threw that soldier out whose spine was twisted, which we get a different angle of in this moment. Donald also sees his death playing out as well, with a scene in which he blew everything up.
It's been an honor, sir. Who are you talking to? It's been an honor.
Sir. Who are you talking to?
Cut to Thraxa, and we get a moment ripped right out of the comics in which they discover the bodies left in the wake of the Viltrumites. That was what closed out issue 28, with the next moment picking up in issue 29. We have Nolan grabbing his son's neck, with him being enraged that he cares about the Thraxans. Mark explained in the comics that it was normal, which then made him snap and grab Mark's throat. Here they flip the order, and as Mark explains this, he basically talks about how he should have felt on Earth. Now at this point, the two other Viltrumites show up, with the positioning being ripped right out of the comics. The leader here is Thraxa, who's a character that comes from the source material. She was actually inserted into the montage of Viltrum back in Season 1, with her being a big character that comes from the pages. However, she appears way later in the run, so they've bumped her up here to make the character more impactful early on. We will be meeting more women as part of the fleet later on, but it just goes to show how tough the women in this society are. I've always loved the blade that she has in her hair as well, and she promises to kill Mark quickly because of who his dad is. Nolan and Mark manage to stand their ground, but the battle's big and bloody and completely over the top. Nolan tells his son to stop holding back, and that if he doesn't fight to kill, then it's only going to go one way. This moment's in the comic too, with Nolan holding his son as he tells him to get ready. In the end, it pushes Mark to where he needs to go, and showcases that he's a very powerful warrior. We sort of get a big montage, and it plays out in a big way, taking place across 2 pages. The art for the battle here is so good, with us getting the characters fighting on top of a background of snapshots of the skirmish. In the end, the pair come out on top, but Mark refuses to do the tough choice. He gets stabbed, and then Nolan steps in, but it leaves him open to an attack by Lucan. This is pulled straight from the source material, with him even holding his guts in as he stomps down on his back. Just like that, he then collapses, but in the show he says it's done, to explain to the Viltrumites to know to pick him up.
It's done.
And from here we cut across to Debbie and Cecil, with this being pulled out of issue 26. Here it's way more restrained, whereas there she slaps him and he teleports out. Debbie says she doesn't want the money from Nolan's books, and this is because it'll make them feel like they're indebted to Cecil. Kept under the thumb, Mark will work with him forever and truly be his slave because he accepts the money. Now during this, Debbie's packing up Nolan's stuff, including his book that we see the front cover of. If that guy in the front looks familiar, well, that's because this is actually Nolan. Nolan wrote about his life in some of his work and then sold it on as science fiction stories. In the end, she ends up taking out his baseball mitts, which he of course used when playing catch with Mark. I feel like this is her refusing to let go and maybe thinking that one day he'll come back. Seems sentimental to hold on to this, but it's of course connected to their son, and maybe she's keeping it to play catch with him, but probably going to get your arm blown off if you do that. Anyway, back on Thraxa, we see Marcus in the same sort of place to where he was at the end of Season 1. Man is bloody, beaten and out on his back, with his dad once more going away. However, at this point he says,
My books. Read my books, Mark.
Now again, this ties into the cover, and in the story it outlines lots of info on the Viltrumites. These are things that aren't well known, and thus they can provide insight on how to defeat them. Debbie puts on a suit and then heads out with Nolan's boxes, but hey, isn't that where the books are? Dearie me. Now we see the man with the invincible gun, which is a story that appears in the comics. They had a bit where Mark went to Art and he read excerpts of the book. Guessing that Art's going to be the one who picks it up here, and then Mark reads them later on, but we're going to have to see. Elsewhere we watch Eve returning home, attempting to make amends with her family. Donald also confirms the truth, and we see the lives of the characters changing in really meaningful ways. This is All Time Yesterday by Zoe Birkbinder, which talks about the past and how you long for a time before things went bad. Cutting back to Thraxa, we hear the voice of Clancy Brown, who's playing the legendary character known as General Krieg. Yeah, he basically gives Mark Nolan's mission and instructs him to resume taking over Earth. In the comics, Man gave him 100 years to do it, whereas here it seems a lot more immediate. He says if Mark doesn't kill a few, then he's gonna kill millions, and it brings things full circle from that opening scene on another universe. Now the credit scene takes us to Mauler in a moment that's ripped right out the source material. This is a clone killing the original Mauler, and thus neither's really gonna know who the clone is. It shows why they don't like knowing, because in the end it just creates a power imbalance. That closes us out with Mauler kneeling over, and we end things with everyone sort of on the downside. No, I was really enjoyed it. And again, just with the whole divorce metaphor, seeing Omni-Man move on to his new life, and then Mark's kind of got to accept that, and he's got to a new brother and stuff. Yeah, it just made me appreciate the source material so much more. And I really, really enjoyed those 4 episodes I got to see. So thanks so much.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you. Like I appreciate the time you spend watching the show and talking about it, because that helps us get an audience and helps us get to make more of the show, which is really all we want to do. So
yeah, no, really, really good. Genuinely.
Thank you. Yeah.
And thanks for speaking to me as well. No, I appreciate it.
Yeah, really nice to meet you, Paul. Hopefully we'll talk to you again maybe for the back half of season 2.
Yeah, no, I'm down. 100%. Yeah, thanks a lot. So obviously, huge thank you to Simon for taking the time to talk to me about the show, and huge thank you to you guys for checking out these videos. I really appreciate it. I really do. Thank you guys so much. And I also want to do a season 2 part 2 predictions video very soon as well. So make sure you stay stuck on the channel for that too. Again, I will be dropping the interview in full on our Clips channel as well. And if we get the opportunity next time, I'd love to see if you guys have any questions that you want me to ask. Please tag it with the name Simon, and then I can just search the comments really easily and get that brought up. Please drop a like on the video as well. And if you want to support the channel as a member of the Spoiler Side Squad, then please click the join button. You get early access to videos every week, and it goes such a long way to helping us out. If you want to get some heavy spoilers merch, we've also got our t-shirt line located below the video that will let you pick up all kinds of tops like our Spoiler-Man one, Theory Time one, House of Dragons stuff, Marvel tees, and a lot more. We drop new designs on there all the time too, so definitely keep an eye out, and thank you for supporting us. Now if you want something else to watch, we've got a video on screen right now, so definitely head over there right after this. By the way, huge thank you for sticking through the video. I've been Paul, I'll see you next time. You take care, peace.